mysteries, hidden history, and the unexplained. Join William Collinson and Lee Strydom on Strange and Mysterious World.
Welcome to Season 3, Episode 9 of Strange and Mysterious World. Tonight, our format's a little bit different as I'll be doing a bit of a solo mission because Lee couldn't make it as he's got a work agenda. But we are interviewing Robert Falconer, internal family systems therapist and author of the book The Others Within Us. A little bit of a follow-on episode from Season 3, Episode 6, when we interviewed Peter Nielsen about his spontaneous Kundalini experience and how he couldn't deal with the sudden change of his whole energy system and how to deal with it. He used IFS to help him get through it. But as well as that, IFS has a lot of other benefits, which we'll get into now with Robert. So without any further ado, here he is. Hi, Robert.
Hello. Good
How
to
you
meet
doing?
you.
Good to meet you too.
I'm doing well. How about you?
Yeah, doing great. Thanks. Very good. Let's start with what is IFS, firstly.
Okay. IFS is a psychotherapeutic modality developed by Richard Schwartz and many others, even though he gets all the credit, about 40 years ago or more. And it's ridiculously, almost cultishly popular in the United States right now. Trainings sell out. Everybody wants to be an IFS therapist, and there's all this stuff. I do, but it is a parts work model. It's based on the realization that we are not one unitary self. We're many selves, and we're actually much more like a team than an individual sport. We're more like a football team than a tennis player in our internal psychic organization, much more. And it's a good thing. This is not caused by trauma, because we need all these different parts to do all these different jobs. Like you wouldn't want the goalie being the forward, or the striker, I guess you call them now. My age is showing. We used to call them forwards 50 years ago. But anyway, and it's also used in many other areas. Now, education, mediation, it's really good. Really, a lot of attorneys are using it in divorce mediations and stuff like that. So, is that
So how did Robert Schwartz come across this though? That
Richard Schwartz? Yeah,
Richard Schwartz, sorry.
Dick. Everybody calls him Dick, and he seems happy with that. He was a family therapist. And, you know, these people back then believed that if you reorganize the family structure, all the symptoms in the individual will disappear. And he worked with a whole bunch of families that had kids with eating disorders, mainly bulimia. You know, they'd eat a tremendous amount and make themselves vomit. And he rearranged all the families just the way the textbooks said you're supposed to. And he wrote one of the biggest textbooks on the subject. And he did an outcome study, and the kids didn't get better. And unlike most social scientists, he actually paid attention to the data and didn't fudge the data. And he started getting really curious about what was going on with these kids. And he started asking them, and they'd say stuff like, well, a part of me really wants to eat, and another part gets really disgusted, and they fight each other, and this disgusted one makes me vomit. So, and then he got this idea that maybe this is he had never had any training in working with people as individuals. It had all been, which is a good thing because he didn't have a lot of garbage to get out of his head. So he thought, well, maybe there's a family structure in the inner world. Maybe each one of us is made up more like a family. So he started working to import the techniques of family therapy into helping people work with their parts, just as he would work with all the different parts in a family.
Oh, okay. And then also, is it because reading your book, I mean, the patients really go really deep internally, and I always keep on thinking like, how is it possible? Is there like a hypnosis kind of technique, or like how does it work?
Okay, okay. First of all, I want to say I go way beyond what mainstream IFS does. Sometimes I call my work beyond IFS. I think IFS is this platform that I stand on and try and go even further. So, yes, Dick does not like talking about altered states of consciousness, but I think we clearly enter them. He does say, and I think he's right in this, when we work inside, we enter the same world that shamans have been visiting for tens of thousands of years. I think we do. He never does any kind of hypnotic induction or uses anything else to induce altered states of consciousness. He just invites people to start paying attention to their inner world. That's all you really need to do, and people will will enter profoundly altered states of consciousness.
Oh. So how did you get into IFS?
Well, my own background, my family was extremely violent, sexual, physical abuse, addictions, and mom was institutionalized, brother was a suicide, dad was murdered in a church-going family. So bathed in a sea of hypocrisy. By all odds, I should be dead like my brother or in prison or a heroin addict and I've been blessed in some ways. I think spirit visited me in a disguise so that I could accept that kind of influence, but I'm also more stubborn than a mule. And I just kept trying all these different therapy techniques, one after another. Many of the things that have been offered in America are damaging. Not only do they not do any good, they're actually damaging. And then I came across various parts works models. The Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California was a big center of Gestalt in America. And that's another parts work model. And I spent many times I've been there and working with that. Ego state therapy, psychosynthesis, voice dialogue, transactional analysis. There are lots of techniques that have realized that we're made up of parts. We're not one unified thing, and that this is actually good and we should work with it. I think, and more recently, 20 years ago, I discovered Dick's work, and I think it's the most respectful and the most potent way of working with parts. I didn't used to put the words respectful and potent together, but now I think it is potent because it's so respectful of all the parts. And it doesn't try and push parts around or bury them in the sub basement or anything like that. It's very respectful, and it elicits cooperation.
Well, and you feel that this has healed you through all of that trauma and everything that you went through.
Well, there's so many other things I've done. I don't think, at some deep level, I don't think people really heal from major trauma without some kind of connection to spirit.
Hmm.
And that idea was not, when I was being trained, you weren't supposed to talk about that in therapy land. We don't do that here in a therapy room. I think that's a huge mistake. So, yeah, I think basically I'm a man of joy, and I'm very productive and creative, and writing a lot of books and teaching a lot of classes, and doing all sorts of stuff that I like. So, yeah.
So about your book, The Others Within, you mentioned in the, I think, I don't know if it was Dick that mentioned it, or you were saying that Dick was very hesitant for you to release that book because you thought it could discredit the whole IFS system. Can you
Yep.
explain why?
Well, he was way beyond reluctant. He did everything he could to prevent me from publishing that book. And only when he read the first draft did he mostly change his opinion and agree to write me a foreword. And it was, and I'm still somewhat, it's more and more accepted now. It used to be they would only teach about this stuff in the level threes, and they didn't want to talk about it because it's so far out there. Basically, what we're talking about, if we go inside with regular IFS, you start discovering parts of yourself. The wounded child is the one that most people know about. Then there's also a level of protectors who do various things to try and protect that inner child. And there's also what Dick calls the self. A lot of other modalities have called the real self or the true self, who we really are. And that cannot be damaged. That's another thing that Dick realized that's super important to trauma survivors. If you keep going farther and farther into this inner world, you start discovering things in people that are not part of who they are, that are not part of their personal lifetime stories. The one people usually come up against first, we call legacy burdens. And these are things from your ancestors. Now, there is hard science behind this now. There's the whole science of epigenetics. There's all the Holocaust studies, the studies of the children, grandchildren, and now I think great-grandchildren of people who were in the Holocaust, in Auschwitz and the camps. They are neurologically different. Their neurochemicals are different, even though they never experienced that trauma themselves, and even though sometimes they never even met people who experienced that trauma themselves. And there are experiments with rats. There's the Diaz-Ressler experiment, which is a very famous experiment in epigenetics. Things can happen to ancestors that we don't know about that can influence our neurochemistry, our emotions, and our reactions and our behavior. That's an established scientific fact. So that much, pretty much everybody has to go along with. But it turns out there are also things inside of people that don't seem to come from their ancestors, that seem to come from somewhere else, who knows where. And these are immensely unpopular to talk about. IFS calls them unattached burdens or guides, if they're positive in their impact. I think, let me put it this way. There is a basic biopsychological dynamic that's occurred in pretty much every culture we have records of in every era of history. This dynamic can have powerful effects on who people are, for good or for ill. The metaphor most frequently used to describe this dynamic is spirit possession. No matter what metaphor we use or what theory we have, this is worthy of study. It happens pretty much everywhere and it has powerful effects. We should study it. But there's so much prejudice against this, it's astounding. People don't want to hear about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's why, because I like in your book, when you went to Vietnam and you spoke about how they deal with spirit possession, and they actually, well, firstly, they actually banned anybody that dealt with doing exorcisms or mediumship or whatever, because the government said it made their country look barbaric and backwards. So they banned
Yeah.
it. And then after that genocide or the war, whatever that happened there, there was all of those hungry ghosts, and everybody started getting like possessed and having really bad health and mental problems. So then the government started subsidizing the mediums. So the mediums had to come out from underground, and the government actually subsidized them to help them like fix the problem, which I
Yeah.
thought was like so fascinating.
Yeah, there's a big tradition in Vietnam that if the remains of someone are not buried appropriately, hopefully in a family grave and with a certain amount of honor, that will become an angry spirit that will haunt people. And of course, during the war, 1 million or so dead just left to rot in the jungles. And the reason the government was sort of forced, the communist government, to recognize these mediums, they could find the bodies. They actually found the bodies. And then they gave this one woman in Hanoi an award because she found like, 300 bodies and helped bring them home, you know.
Yeah.
So now they're recognized, and the communist government, which is, officially atheist, all this stuff is garbage. They've sort of been forced to recognize this and acknowledge it, which I think is wonderful. And thank God they were open enough. They could have continued to deny this forever.
Yeah. And also what they said that when they treat people, there's two ways of treating them. There's the yin that was for physiological kind of ailments, and then there's the yang for spiritual kind of ailments. And they kind of
Mhm.
like just reflect one another. So you would go, so that the doctors kind of look at both of them, which I think is a more healthier, holistic like way that we all should be looking at stuff, because that's the thing that's missing in our whole health system, is that we're only focusing on the one side and not the other side, and it needs to come together so that
Yeah.
people can properly get healed. So I think it was quite amazing that they recognize it. But you went through your whole book on like every culture that has this. It's just basically the very small percentage, the Western world, which there's an acronym, weird.
Yes.
What is that acronym? What is it?
Rich, educated, industrial, developed, and white. Oh, white, rich, Yeah. We're less than 20%. Less. So we're weird. The rest of the world is something. And even in the weird countries, it's only the elite that have these beliefs, the self-proclaimed elite. Um, there were some big public opinion polls in the United States. 80% believed in a personal God, 50% believed in spirit possession, 60% think they'd talk to the dead, the souls of dead people. So these beliefs are still here. It's just our universities won't recognize this.
Yeah, I know. And then when someone prominent that can actually make a change, like Carl Jung, when because he was actually with his whole the what's it the consciousness, the collective consciousness idea, which is basically these spirits coming in and out of us all the time, and that's how we function. It's just like a natural way. And then he wrote
Yeah,
the Red Book because and
yeah,
he didn't want to just be discredited by the mainstream, or like the mainstream science at the time. So when he died, he said that the book must be released 50 years later, but it started leaking out and it got released a bit earlier. But why? I just always wondered why 50 years later? Why did he want to release it? Like, I mean, if you're dead, just release it like the next day. You're gone.
yeah. Well, I think he wanted everyone he knew to be dead. I don't know.
Well,
But he did in that book, he talked to spirits. They had dialogues, they would talk back and forth. And he said later, um, all my work stems from the events that happened during the Red Book. All his understanding of the depths of the psyche. I want to go back to something else you said about how the Vietnamese medical system with its yin yang way of dealing is better than ours, and we should be learning from them. I think this is really, really true, and it pains me a lot. There's this woman, Tanya Luhrmann, who's a wonderful anthropologist, and she studies psychosis and spirituality all over the world. She did a study comparing treatment outcomes with acute psychosis in San Mateo, California, Accra, Ghana, and Chennai, India. Now, here in California, we spend about 1,000 times more money than either of those other two places. We get the worst results. The worst results. And if that's not depressing enough, we are actively exporting our methods of care and crushing the more traditional ways of dealing with psychosis. Especially in India, the government there to westernize and modernize has a very active plan to destroy the traditional healing temples. And it's working. Some of the ancient rites have been lost, and on and on and on.
uh-huh. But that reminds me of here in South Africa, because and you do mention this in your book as well. with the Zulu and the Xhosa, they with the shamans, well, they call them sangomas here.
Mhm.
They go through the rite of passage to become a shaman here in South Africa is that you start going through a series of psychosis. You start hearing things, seeing visions, acting weird. You get actually very sick, like physically, like rashes, ailments, and stuff like that. And our Western culture, if that happens to us, we just get straight jacket, every pill you can imagine, and you're into the hospital, probably for, a very long time. But yeah, they recognize it and they look up to it and they say, no, you've got a calling sickness.
Yeah.
And you have to face it. You have to go to initiation to shaman initiation because the ancestors are contacting you and trying to work through you to for you to become a powerful healer. And if you ignore it, you actually get more sick and bad luck happens to you and everything. So you go along with it, and it's held in high regard and like esteem, and people they look up to it. And I mean, I've seen, a few sangomas and like they've helped me through quite like different things and that, and
Hmm.
I find it very useful. And I just find it, yeah, this Western society's slowly killing it. And it's sad to see where it's going.
Yeah. Yeah. And we in the West have an epidemic of mental illness, and our healthcare system is failing or maybe has failed. We need something radically different, not just little tweaks in what we're doing, some big, big changes. I want to mention one other thing. This wasn't Tanya Luhrmann, it was another anthropologist who I think was associated with her, studied two young people with acute psychosis, florid psychosis. Both of them had to be institutionalized for their own safety, and they had to be given meds to calm them down. One was in, I think, again, California, the other was in Thailand. The guy in California, after this, goes and sees the local California version of a witch doctor in his white coat with his stethoscope, the psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist says, your brain is broken. All the most intense visionary and emotional experiences of your life are absolutely meaningless, and it's incurable. Not, I can't help you. You are incurable. Now, that's a poison message,
Mm.
poison. And this guy goes on meds that in about a decade will turn his brain into mush, and you, you can imagine the path of his life after this. Woman in Thailand has similar experience, has to be institutionalized, medicated. She comes out, she goes back to her village, and they tell her, you've been given a very difficult but wonderful life. You are on the front lines of the cosmic battle between good and evil.
Mm.
If you fight well, you can help many others, many others. Your life is meaningful. It's very difficult. Now, both of these people continued to have intermittent florid psychotic episodes. The guy in San Mateo or wherever it was, somewhere in California, had a miserable life, predictably, and had no didn't value himself at all. The woman in Thailand contributed a lot to the world around her, and she knew that what was going on in her was of great value.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know about cosmic battles between good and evil. I'm just old Bob here on my mountainside in California. But I do know, I think I can say pretty clear, which one of these people has a better life? That to me seems like almost brain dead obvious.
Yeah, totally. Geez, yeah, I know. I got goosebumps there, Bob. And so, Bob, just bringing it back to the IFS now, the UBs. So once you recognize a UB in somebody, like what happens next?
Okay. Well, most people freak out and send the person away. That's reality. Well, I'll tell you this story about how I got involved in this because, with what little I said about my background, I was a trauma therapist. I worked with men who had been sexually and physically abused in their childhoods, And I felt like I got pretty good at this. And I felt like I had a whole container, trauma oriented. I was the head of a little tiny nonprofit called the Institute for Trauma Oriented Psychotherapy for more than a decade. I thought I knew what I was doing. I was about 60. That's 17 years ago now. Um, and I met this woman in a training, and she had one of these things in her, and I'd heard about them, and I did some very, very basic things and got it out. And then she started sending me these emails after she went home from the training. And I wanted to ignore this. I wanted to pretend this didn't really happen. I'm just going to ignore this. It doesn't fit. It's so, ugh. And it was creepy and weird. And my friends were laughing at me and going, "Oh, Bob, Ghostbuster." They called me Ghostbuster Bob. Oh, it was really bad, William. So I'm going to ignore that. I'm going to ignore that. But she started sending me these emails. She says, "Oh, that session has changed my life. I'm seeing colors that I haven't seen. I can sense the God in the other people I see, even in the airport." And then I started thinking, I've triggered a manic episode. I'm in deep trouble. And then she sent me an email that changed my life. She said, "Bob, I didn't tell you this, but when I was a teenager, I tried to kill myself many times. And I was locked up many times. And when I tried to tell people about this thing inside me that wasn't me back then, they gave me electroshock and injected me with horrible drugs. You are the first person to ever believe me, and you have changed my life." And I went,
Oh,
"Oh shit, I can't ignore this." I cannot ignore this now. So I've devoted the majority of my energies since then to working with this kind of stuff. And most other therapists, they sense this. They don't want anything to do with this. So, which is kind of good for me because I get all these referrals. You see any of that weird stuff, send it to Bob, send it to Bob, send it to Bob. So
wow.
it's sad for the people because there's so few people doing this, but it's it's that's why I feel in like 17 years or whatever it's been, I've been able to learn as much as I have because other people don't want to touch this. It's too weird and creepy.
Yeah, sure. And then also just back to the parts, there was also examples in your book, like of the guy that used to walk his dog, and then he would get to the bridge and he would have these thoughts like, "Oh, just throw the dog over the balcony, just throw it over the into the water." Or like he would
Yeah.
be having a cup of coffee and he'd be talking to someone, and then this thought would come like, "Just throw the coffee in his face, just throw the coffee in his
Yeah.
face." So
Yeah.
is that the parts or is that the UB?
In this guy's case, that was a UB. And
Oh,
he had this really cute little dog called, what was it, Mr. Socks, a little tiny thing. And he loved it. He was deeply in love with his dog. And he'd be walking past a fire and he'd have this thought, "I'm going to throw it in the fire and watch it burn and, enjoy its suffering." And he'd go, "What? What?" It was so weird. It was something in him that didn't belong in him. And this was actually a case that Dick did, and Dick got this thing out. And the guy hasn't, I've followed that guy. This guy hasn't had those thoughts, those intrusive thoughts anymore.
wow. Because it made me a bit worried, Bob, because like I've had like a few thoughts like that, or like especially if I'm in a high place, like on a balcony or like like on a cliff or something, I get these thoughts like just jump. But then my other half of me is like, "Hey, what the hell? Where did that come from? Why are you thinking like that? What is that? Where did that come
Yeah.
from? I don't want to jump." And then it's like, so I started thinking like, geez, I better start looking for an IFS therapist around Cape Town here. But then in your book you were saying like how it's still not the UB thing is still not really recognized that much, and some even shy away from it. So like now to try and find somebody in Cape Town that actually, because I saw there's a level one person, I think I saw a level two. So
Mhm.
yeah, so is it widely accepted the UB thing or in IFS at the
Well,
moment?
pretty much, but a lot of people don't want to deal with it. Dick used to teach about it in the level threes, pretty much always. So, but he didn't want it introduced at the beginning. So it is definitely there, and but a lot of people don't want to deal with it at all. On a personal note, I have a list of people who've studied with me. I could send you that. Almost everybody works online now, so your geographical location is not really that significant.
Ah, okay, so you can do IFS online.
Oh yeah, I do it. I do everything online now.
Oh, wow, okay.
Everything. Most of my clients are overseas. Maybe not most. Half. Half of my clients are not in America.
Oh. And
And I
that
find
late,
that absolutely fascinating because I really enjoy being exposed to all the other cultures.
yeah, sure. So that lady that first one that you did where she had those manic episodes, well, it was so in
Yeah.
ecstasy afterwards. Have you kept in touch with her?
Yeah, I did for about 15 years. The last year or so, I've dropped off because I know she's actually not, she's now, last time I talked to her, she was terminally ill with stage 4 cancer.
Oh,
So I
okay.
figured I'd stop bugging her. But for the 15 years, it was, yeah, her life flowered, all the internal and external dimensions of it. All these
Oh,
wonderful things happened, and she continued. Yeah, this was a pivot point in my life. It changed how I can live. And I think
oh,
the only real way to evaluate a therapeutic interaction. In the days, weeks, months, and years ahead, does it change how that person lives for the better?
yeah.
Then, whatever it was, I don't care how bizarre the theory, yeah, it worked.
Yeah, sure.
And if it doesn't do that, uh-uh.
No. No, because that's what yeah, I wanted to ask you that question because I mean I've tried so many things as well, like I mean also just the talk therapy, I mean, years of that and it wasn't working. So I went to other modalities in that. And then it's always like I think I found like the silver bullet or something that's amazing. And then you find out that the patients have been just going for it for years and years, and it's like even like there's a whole psilocybin thing now. There's the psilocybin mushroom like huge trend like fad that's taken off, and there's been astonishing results, and there's data, proper scientific data. But I mean, I started doing a documentary about it, and the psychiatrists and psychologists that I was interviewing that actually do this therapy, they said, yeah, no, it works for about 8 months. And because the brain's so malleable that if you don't do proper therapy after that, you just go straight back to your old ways. So it's not like a permanent fix. So then I got disencouraged by that, and it's like, so it's good to hear that that lady was,
Okay,
she,
let me talk about that some because I have very strong opinions about psychedelic therapy. I've been involved with psychedelics since 1967. I've had a couple hundred experiences of my own and probably sat with that many people. And I think a good psychedelic experience, and this is a metaphor from a researcher in the UK, Robin Carhart Williams. He said it's like a snowfall on a ski slope
mm,
where everybody was skiing down the same things. Now you got a whole fresh mountain. You can ski down any ski slope and make
mm,
new tracks. But if there isn't good integration and follow up, people will go back to their old ways.
yeah,
But if there is good follow up, they will establish new ones that endure. Now, I want to mention one of the MAP studies, which is the group in America that's trying to get MDMA legalized for the treatment of PTSD. Their protocol is basically 3 MDMA sessions with like 3 therapy sessions before, between, and after. That's the whole deal. And there are written tests of PTSD. 52% after going through, this is just one of their cohorts, 52% no longer scored as having PTSD at all. That's unheard ofly good. Now, the really important point is a year later, with no further therapeutic intervention, 68% scored with no PTSD. In
wow,
other words, the change was generative. And I think if psychedelics are handled well, they can create generative change.
Mm.
And I'm not happy about the training standards for psychedelics in the therapy world these days, but that's a whole nother subject.
Yeah, no, sure. So sorry, let's get back to IFS. Sorry, we keep going on like a bit of a detour. But so the UBs, unattached burdens, how do they get in?
All kinds of ways. Sometimes they come down as legacy burdens. They anytime you're out of your body, they can get in. The most classic way and the most, I don't know, most frequent probably, who knows, but no, but you can't make statistics on this stuff. It's just not quantifiable really. There's some kid who's being abused or hurt and it needs power. It desperately needs power. So the UB comes in and offers power to the powerless. And then it does its best to burrow its way in and stay hidden. And it doesn't really, they're parasites. They seem to be parasites. And so it doesn't really give power. It keeps that part of the person powerless so that it continues to feel dependent upon that UB.
So,
They also often offer companionship to the abandoned child. That some abandoned, terribly lonely child wants somebody to be with it, and they sense this energy around them, and oh, come on in, please be with me. And then that energy does everything it can to keep the child isolated and to create a life of isolation for that person so it gets to stay. Another way these things get into children often is when a child has a lot of early life surgeries and with anesthesia, because anesthesia drives, you're out of your body when you're under full anesthesia. Another way these things get in a lot in adults, psychedelic experiences. Psychedelic experiences open up all the boundaries of our minds and things come in and out. And I want to say most of the time, overwhelmingly in psychedelic experiences, the spirits or entities or whatever word you want to use that come into a person are positive. And there have been several major studies about this we could discuss. But
okay. So in your book, you mentioned that like in Buddhism, um, they recognize spirit possession like it's like just kind of uh straightforward to them. It's like natural, but they say that you shouldn't be given an exorcism or worry the spirit because it's the person's karma that they have to
well,
deal with that spirit.
Some Buddhists say that. That was one Korean monk that I interviewed in Korea. And he said, I know big monks do this. They get them out. But he felt that they should be left in a person because it was a person's karma to deal with them. I don't agree with that. I mean,
Yeah,
I
sure.
would
Just
do.
like what you mentioned about the kid, like being abandoned. I mean, what kind of karma is that to the spirit, like latching onto them, like I
Yeah, who
think,
knows? There really isn't a way, to develop any statistics yet.
yeah, sure. Hey, so, do you think we all have UBs in us?
Don't know. Many, many, many people do. And when you start being aware of them, you start noticing these weird, funny things at the edges of your perception. An anthropologist who studied spirit possession in Africa, I think his name was Sordas, he said in African traditions, the most powerful demons are always the hidden ones.
Hmm.
So these things usually do not want to be discovered. They do everything they can to remain hidden, invisible, and just stay in the background of people's minds. So who knows how many there are? And of course, I have a skewed sample because all these people are coming to me from all over the world because they think they might have something like this in them.
Yeah, sure. I mean, but did you
I
some?
want to. want to make people get all scared and freaked out. And, oh God, no, not the, these external energies have absolutely no power in you once you're no longer afraid of them. When you are not afraid of them, they lose all their power, and their ability to stay in you disintegrates. So the primary method is when you find something like this in a person, you find any parts of the person who are afraid of it, and you work with them and you help them connect to that person's self until they feel loved and secure and welcome, and then they're ready to let go of the thing. And then you look for any other parts of the person, ask questions like, any part in there unwilling to let this go? And you just work with every part, patiently welcoming them back into the family so that they feel they're part of the internal family again. And when that internal family is whole and loving again, then these things can't stay and they're pretty easy to help them go, even though they might bluster and yell and threaten and make all kinds of noise.
Mm. But you also said in your book that they don't actually mean to do damage. They just like damaged souls themselves that also just need love and attention. And that's
Yeah,
how you should treat it in the session.
yeah. I, I'm not sure that's 100% the case. Overwhelmingly, overwhelmingly. And the spiritists of Brazil, who have been studying this and working with it for over 150 years, and there are over 50 psychiatric hospitals in Brazil that use spiritist techniques. They use this stuff about getting these energies out of people to help them with psychosis. They say it's all wounded souls. It's all hurting beings who are clinging to other people out of fear and desperation. And that once you discover something like this in a person, it's your job to help that as much as it is your job to help the person.
Mm.
And some people insist they're these big nasties and other energies. There are a few times I've seen stuff that might be like that, but I don't know. I
Uh,
don't have a
so, I mean, is there a way to protect yourself against these things?
Well, there's all these things that people do all over the planet. Um, Burning sage in America, from the indigenous people here, that's what they use to clean themselves spiritually. In the Caribbean, they use this stuff called agua de floridas. It's a very sweet, nice smelling, like cologne like water. Other places they use other odors. People use there's all kind of necklaces and seeds and oh the spiritists in Brazil like smoky quartz.
Mm.
They think that gets these things. I don't think that all that stuff can sort of help, but I think the basic thing is being in your body. When you're in your body and centered, you're safe. And so many people want to build some kind of container or walls, and that has its place. But what I like doing, there's a meditation on my website called the Seal of Light or Sealing Light. Basically, you just invite people to look inside, find the center of life force within them. Most people experience that as a spark of light, like a star in the night sky. Might be warmth or a vibration or any, and then just focus on that until it expands and fills their whole body. And then let it go poof through their skin, expand around them to a couple feet all around them, noticing any obstructions, constrictions, anything like that. When people are well connected to the source of their life force, to their deep self, to who they really, really are, these things can't get in. Another reason why I like doing it this way, if you're putting all this energy into building walls around you, that drains you. It's defensive stuff. It's not good for you. Whereas doing this work of focusing on cultivating and opening to your own life force is good for you. It makes you stronger and more full of energy. So that's the basic safety thing I encourage people to do. And loving all your own parts. When you are a healthy, loving family inside, these things have a very, very, very hard time getting in.
And with people astral traveling, there's like there's people astral traveling or out of body experiences. Is that you would frown upon that? Is that dangerous, do you think?
No, I don't. There might be some dangers, but I think there might be wonderful things to it too. I wouldn't frown upon it. And I don't frown upon people doing psychedelics just because that opens up the portals and can allow these things in. I'm a big fan of William James, the American psychologist who died, I think, before World War One. And he talked a lot about radical pragmatism. What works? And he went so far as to say, what works is what's real. So I try and keep my focus on there's a suffering person in front of me. I put blinders on, like an old horse. There's a suffering person in front of me. What can I do to help relieve their suffering? And I just try and let go of all my theories about everything and just focus on that. Like that woman in Thailand, it relieved her suffering to have this strong belief in a cosmic battle of good and evil. I don't need to have an opinion about the cosmic battle of good and evil. That's just arrogant of me to start making judgments like that. What I need to have an opinion about is what's helping or hurting this person. And
Yeah.
if I stay with that focus, I think I can do a lot more healing work.
Yeah, because also like in the beginning of your book, you did mention you said, um, you know, the guy that discovered the germs, and
Hmm.
he was in the hospital delivering babies on the top floor or on one of the
Yeah,
wards or whatever.
Semmelweis. Yeah,
Yes, and he was delivering babies, but he would wash his hands with bleach between and there's this rampant fever that took over the whole hospital, and like there were so many people dying, but his ward seemed to be not having the problem because he would always wash his hands with the bleach before everything. And then he started saying that there's something in our hands, like I don't know if he called it germs then or whatever. And then everyone started like attacking him and saying like, "How dare you make it like we killing the people and everything?" So much so that he actually went to a mental institution and he died. I think he committed
yeah, yeah.
suicide.
No, he didn't commit suicide. He died after a beating by the guards.
Oh
Makes
my
it even
God.
worse. And he was fired from his job, and he knew that the other doctors wouldn't like this idea, so he didn't want to tell anybody. But his assistants on the ward, they started bragging about the results they got. So he was sort of dragged into this thing and then talked about it. And people who are ahead of their time often get attacked. Ignaz Semmelweis was the doctor's name.
But then you gave a great example, like I forgot who says it, but there's three stages to a new theory.
Oh yeah, Schopenhauer. Yeah, for new ideas, they go through three stages. At first, they're ridiculed and made fun of, and the people who espouse them are scapegoated. Second stage, they're argued against vehemently. Third stage, they're accepted as self-evident.
Yeah, and it sounds like we're just living in that day and age right now. It's like and like
I think
we've
we're
got,
we're still in one, but you might be moving towards two.
but I mean, it just goes through the whole history. It just never ever ends. I mean, from a flat Earth to we're going around the sun and not and the sun going around us and it just keeps on going down, down. At least now we don't get burnt alive. We just kicked off Twitter while we used to, or like off YouTube or whatever. But, I mean,
Yeah,
that's the Inquisition now. But
yeah, that's an improvement.
yeah. So it never. I just wonder when we can just stop being so arrogant and just look at the data. You know.
God, yeah, that would be wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. So, is there anything else you'd like to add, Bob?
Let me see. Um, yeah, I'm exploring new realms or new areas. I'm pushing the frontiers of what's considered acceptable to talk about. And I know I'm going to be wrong about a lot of the things I say. Everybody who is pushing at the edges is going to be wrong about a lot of the things they say. So I've sort of made it my goal not to be 100% right, but to be usefully wrong, to put some idea out there that people can work with and use that to go beyond what I've been able to discover, work with, and explore. And you sort of mentioned before that my book it's big and it's heavy and it's carefully researched and it's almost encyclopedic and all the stuff it brings up. And that's because I wanted for any of the rationalists out there who are going, this just has to be weirdo bull. you know, no, you can go through this book and stage by stage, chapter by chapter, you could refute each one, but I don't think you're going to be able to do that. I think you're going to have to open your mind pretty radically.
Yeah. And you bring a lot of like science and examples, and it's you make it quite hard for people to think otherwise. And yeah, thank you for that book. But I think it's really an important book, and to try and shift our way of into the new future of how we're going to be, healing ourselves and each other. So it was remarkable. So thank you for bringing that out to the world. Um, and also, it's so frustrating because like we will never move forward unless someone steps outside of the paradigm and says, "Hey, look at this way," And we
Yeah.
all just want to stay in this way and not move anywhere and not advance. And as soon as someone does that, they are just taken down and just destroyed. But then we don't go anywhere. So
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
frustrating. But thank you for doing that, getting outside of the
Okay.
boundary. And please, everyone that's listening, just go get a hold of that book. It is amazing.
Thank
And
you. One reason I could do it is because this came to me when I was at retirement age.
oh wow.
And I didn't need a career. I didn't need anyone to approve of me. I'd sort of achieved escape velocity. So I could
So,
follow
so if
whatever it
you
was that was real, you
so if
know?
somebody wanted to cancel you, you'll just be like, "Oh, it's too bad, I'm retired."
Yeah, go
Cancel,
ahead. I'm already canceled.
cancel myself.
But I'm actually more creative and busier now than I've ever been.
Oh,
And I'm
wonderful.
77 and I'll be 77 in less than 2 months.
Oh, wow,
And
you're in
I
good
hope,
nick.
I hope my body and mind stay together because there's lots more things I'm exploring and new edges and I find I find the universe endlessly fascinating. And every time I think I answer one question, 10 new ones open up that are even more astounding.
Oh,
So,
that's great. It keeps us moving. But that's great. Well, I hope I hope I really look forward to what's coming out next. So just keep them coming while you still got all that energy in you. Wonderful.
yeah, well, I still can.
Well, geez.
Okay, William, are we complete or is there anything more you wanted to ask
No, that's
about?
it. Well, thank you. Thank you, Bob. Thank you so much for coming. I don't know if you want to say where people can contact you, or do you wanna
Yeah, robertfalconer.us.
okay,
And it's
great.
like Falconer. That's my website. It has most of the stuff, a lot of free stuff. There's a YouTube channel. Um, so
Fantastic.
yeah, that's the best way. And I do try to read every email that comes to me through there, and I'm pretty good about that. I don't always answer them all, but I'm pretty good at that. I try to do my best.
Oh, thank you, Bob. Well, thank you for taking my email.
Okay, great talking with you, William.
Thanks, Bob. Have a good
Bye bye.
day. Cheers, man. Bye bye.